I come to the floor at this time to talk about the urgent issue before the Senate and before the country. We come to this chamber, as we have many times before, to make one of the most difficult decisions we are tasked to make, which is the authorization of the use of American military power, this time in Syria, to respond to the horrific attack, including the use of chemical weapons of August 21st that took the lives of over 1,429 Syrians, including at least 426 children. The world is watching, and America is waiting to see what we do in this chamber in response to the threat the world faces from those who cross the lines of human decency and use chemical weapons against anyone, anywhere in the world. Now, the images of that August 21st attack are sickening, and in my view, the world cannot ignore the inhumanity and horror of what Bashar al-Assad did. Now, as I've said many times before as a member of Congress, I do not take the responsibility to authorize military force lightly or make such decisions easily. I voted against the war in Iraq when every public poll said it was popular to vote for the war. I have been a strong advocate of a more robust drawdown in Afghanistan. But today, I urge my colleagues to support this tightly crafted, clearly focused resolution to give the President authorization to use military force in the face of this horrific crime against humanity. Now, yes, there are clearly risks to any actions we authorize, but the consequences of inaction, the consequences of standing down from fully upholding the norms of international behavior are greater and graver still. Future humanitarian disaster in Syria, regional instability, loss of American credibility around the world, and embolden Iran and North Korea, and the disintegration of international law. This vote will be one of the most difficult any of us will be asked to make. But the American people expect us to make those hard decisions and to take hard votes. They expect us to put aside political differences and personal ideologies, to forget partisanship and preconceptions, to even not necessarily follow where the wind is blowing. This is a moment, I believe, for profiles in courage, a moment for each of us to do what we know is right, based on what we know is the best interests of the United States, regardless of what the political pundits will say. To be clear, the authorization Senator Corker and I are introducing, and Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be listed as a sponsor and Senator Corker be listed as the co-sponsor of the resolution.
Without objection.
The authorization we are introducing is for focused action with a clear understanding that American troops will not be on the ground in combat. We've worked closely together to put politics aside, weigh the facts, search our consciences, and pass a resolution in committee that we believe is in the national security interests of the American people. I've said before and will say again, this is not a declaration of war, but a declaration of our values. And I want to thank Senator Corker, the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who's been a close partner in helping to tailor and focus the language of this resolution so it reflects the will of the committee, the interests of the American people, and at the same time gives the President the authority he needs to respond to serious use of chemical weapons against its own people. Now, what do we know? Because I see, as I was back home in New Jersey, listening to citizens who came up to me concerned, and I think it's important to say, what do we know? What we know is clear, notwithstanding Assad's interviews and his denials. According to the declassified intelligence assessment, we know with high confidence that the Syrian government carried out a chemical weapons attack in the Damascus suburbs on August the 21st. We know that the buck stops with Assad his interview denials aside. We know that he controls the regime's stockpiles of chemical agents, including mustard, sarin, and VX gas, and has thousands of munitions capable of delivering them, again, under his control. It is inconceivable and defies all logic that he would not know about the preparations and deployment of these horrific weapons. We know that personnel involved in this program are carefully vetted to ensure loyalty to the regime and the security of the program. We know that chemical weapons personnel from the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center, which is a subordinate of the regime's Ministry of Defense, were operating in the Damascus suburbs of Adra from Sunday, August the 18th, into early in the morning of Wednesday, August 21st, near an area that the regime uses to mix chemical weapons, including sarin. And human intelligence, as well as signal and geospatial intelligence, have shown regime activity in the preparations of chemicals prior to the attack, including the distribution and use of gas masks. And we also know that where in fact, the attacks took place from was from those areas that the regime and Assad controlled into those suburbs of Damascus that rebels were fighting. And we know that the rebels do not have the wherewithal to have the type of artillery that ultimately delivered these chemical weapons, nor do they have the access to these chemical weapons. Now, some may still, in the face of all of those facts, be skeptical about Assad's involvement, but clearly the buck stops with Assad when it comes to the use of these weapons. Now, some may also be skeptical that we have not done enough to allow diplomacy to work. But the fact is, we have tried diplomacy. We have gone to the United Nations on many occasions, and it has only bought Assad more time. Notwithstanding Russia's belated offer today to take action, which, by the way, may only be on the table specifically because of the threat of the use of force, let's not forget it has been their intransigence that brought us to this point in the first place. The fact is, on August 28th, a week after the attack, Russia blocked a United Nations Security Council resolution that called, quote, for all necessary measures to be taken, and simply called for any state that used chemical weapons to be held accountable. The Russians could not even accept a resolution that simply said that any state that uses chemical weapons should be held accountable. On the day of the attack, August 21st, Russia blocked a Security Council press statement, a simple press statement, expressing concern that chemical weapons might have been used. They couldn't support an expression of concern. On August 6th, Russia blocked another press statement welcoming the news that a UN investigations team would investigate these sites and calling for their full and unfettered access to those sites. Russia has also vetoed a Security Council resolution enshrining the June 30th Geneva communique brokered by Kofi Annan, vetoed a resolution calling for an end to violence in Syria, vetoed a draft resolution endorsing the Arab League's plan of action that would have condemned human rights violations. They blocked a press statement calling for humanitarian access to the besieged city of Homs, and one calling for Syrian authorities to provide the United Nations with humanitarian access. All of these actions that simply would have put the UN in a position to observe and possibly to help, they blocked. And over the course of the conflict in Syria, the United States government, specifically the State Department, has met consistently with its close allies and partners, as well as with Syria's neighbors, to help prepare the region to detect, prevent, and respond to the potential use or proliferation of chemical weapons. I think, as Ambassador Power Power acknowledged in her remarks at the Center for American Progress on September the 6th, the United States has regularly engaged with the Russians, and the Iranians even, to attempt to get them to use their influence to stop the Assad regime from using chemical weapons. And that very same day, on September 6th, the United States and 10 other countries issued a joint statement condemning the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons. Australia, Canada, France, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Saudi Arabia, Spain, Turkey, and Great Britain. Since then, 14 other nations have also signed on to that statement. Albania, Croatia, Denmark, Estonia, Germany, Honduras, Hungary, Kosovo, Latvia, Lithuania, Morocco, Qatar, Romania, and the United Arab Emirates. It's only the threat by the president and this resolution that would drive both Russia and Syria to the possibility of a negotiating table. The facts are clear. We have tried diplomacy. Let us understand that this action is not a choice of force or diplomacy. It's about both. It's about enforcing international norms that will, at the end of the day, leverage necessary UN action and help bring about a political solution. For those who want to see UN Security Council action, those who want to push Syria to sign a chemical weapons agreement and give up their weapons, this resolution is the best path to getting there. And let me finally say to my colleagues who believe that the authorization of the use of military force will be nothing more than, I've heard this phrase several times, than a pinprick. This resolution will have clear and verifiable consequences. It will help keep these weapons in check, degrade Assad's ability to deploy them, and I believe prevent the proliferation of chemical weapons and their use by others in the world. The resolution will have clear consequences, but at the same time, it's also not open-ended. It appropriately narrows the scope, duration, and breadth of the authority granted to meet congressional concerns and the concerns of the American people. It is tightly tailored to give the president necessary and appropriate authority to use military force to respond to the use of weapons of mass destruction in Syria, protect the national security interests of the United States, our allies and partners, and degrade Syria's capacity to use the weapons in the future. It has a requirement for determination that the use of military force is necessary, that appropriate diplomatic and other peaceful means to prevent the deployment and use of chemical weapons by Syria have been used, and that the United States has both a specific military plan to achieve the goal of responding to the use of weapons of mass destruction by the Syrian government, and that the use of military force is consistent with broader goals of U.S. strategy towards Syria, including achieving a negotiated settlement to the conflict. And a limitation that specifies that the resolution does not authorize the use of United States armed forces on the ground in Syria for the purposes of combat operations, assuring that there will be no boots on the ground. And that authorization would end after 60 days, with the president having the ability to request and certify for another 30 days, and Congress having an opportunity, if it disagreed, to pass a resolution of disapproval. It provides for an integrated United States government strategy for Syria, including a comprehensive review of current and planned U.S. diplomatic, political, economic, and military policy towards Syria, and a status report to the Congress. Now, let me say in conclusion, history has taught us harsh lessons when it comes to the use of chemical weapons. The images we've seen of children lying on the floor on August 21st were not the first images the world has ever seen of the horrors of chemical attacks. We saw them over 100 years ago, nearly 100 years ago in World War I. If we do not learn from and live by the lessons of the past, if we fail the test of history, then we're destined and doomed to repeat it. If we allow the use and proliferation of chemical weapons, despite the world's horror at the gruesome and horrific use of those that were used at the beginning of the last century, then we risk the same horrors again in this century. Let's not fail the test of history. Let us say to the world that we cannot allow anyone to use chemical weapons again, that we can never allow such weapons to fall in the hands of stateless actors and terrorists who would unleash them against America or American interests around the world. So for all of those reasons, and I want to make sure that the ranking member gets time, I'll ask unanimous consent that my full statement be entered into the record. I believe this is in the national security interest of the United States, and I passionately urge my colleagues to think about the consequences of inaction. With that, I'd be happy to yield to the ranking member.